Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Echo Wirm Live. This is a live stream that we do typically every other Thursday. Of course, today is a Tuesday. I had to make some arrangements given my schedule this week, so hopefully it doesn't affect you guys too much. But this is the normal time that we usually do it, around that kind of 4 o'clock Eastern time. Go for about an hour and a half to 2 hours talking about all of the questions that you guys have left on the channel, or over on Discord, or over on Patreon. Of course, if you are a member of the Patreon community, you get kind of a prioritized list of your questions here on the live stream. If we don't get to one of your questions that you want answered, whether it be pre-prepared or in the live chat, don't worry, just drop it in the comment section below and we'll talk about it next week. But for those of you who are here in the live chat, thank you very much for joining us. You are always welcome to ask questions that you may have in the chat. If you guys are listening afterwards, same thing. If you guys want to drop those comments down below, you guys are more than welcome to, and we will cover them in 2 weeks' time. We're going to start with a few pre-prepared questions today. First one, actually, it's kind of the one everybody's asking. A bunch of people here. Eileen Wong asks, have you done Magnus Chase yet? Ray2009 says, will you do the Magnus Chase books? Prometheus Plays says, I was curious, are you going to do the Magnus Chase books? John Danyon says, Magnus Chase is a great series. Alexis Whiting says, formally starting a petition for Magnus Chase. Uvi Views says, will we be getting the Magnus Chase series soon? I'm going to follow that with another series of questions, and I'll answer both at once. Maddie asks, can you do an audiobook about the sun and the star? Star Lover says, you should try reading The Sun and the Star. The King of the Wild asks, can you read The Sun and the Star? Wakpo Boss asks, are you going to do The Sun and the Star? Basic Banana says, you still haven't done The Sun and the Star. Error Gontum says, as a suggestion, could you read The Sun and the Star by Rick Riordan? And then Wing Tiger says, hope you're doing all of Rick's books. I would love to hear the Norse stories from you. So if you guys are new here and have never heard me go through just kind of the schedule of what's coming up on the channel, we are going to do every one of Rick Riordan's main series of books. Of course, we've already done the Percy Jackson, including 2 of the 3 new ones. The 3rd one is not out yet, so when that does come out later on this year, we will do that one as well. But then in addition to the Percy Jackson books, we've already done the Heroes of Olympus books. We've already done the Kane Chronicles. We will finish the entirety of the Trials of Apollo series. Right now, the 1st book is available for free on this channel. The 2nd book is airing daily channels, I should say, on Echo Wirm Audiobooks, our main daily channel. So if you guys are new here, coming from one of the channels to the other one, that is available here. Just airing every day. It is already available in full, the 2nd and 3rd books, over on Patreon. So if you guys do want to jump ahead of the channel on YouTube by about 2 months or so, you are more than welcome to do so. It's $5 a month. You can find a link in the description below, patreon.com/EchoWirm. Then, of course, once we're done with all 5 of the Trials of Apollo books, we will then move on to Magnus Chase. And in between those, however, you will see The Sun and the Star, which is the Nico D'Angelo book. That'll just drop on the channel immediately as soon as we're done with the 5th book in Trials of Apollo. Then, of course, we will do the Magnus Chase books, and then we will be done with Rick Riordan. We'll sprinkle in a few of the side books, you know, like the Brooklyn House Magician's Manual, Percy Jackson's Greek Gods, Percy Jackson's Greek Heroes, that sort of thing. All of those will come in time. Just give me a little time. They'll be sprinkled every so often. But that is the plan for Rick Riordan going forward into the future. Cringe on YouTube says, what was your favorite of the first 5 Percy Jackson and the Olympian books to read, and why? My favorite, I say this, I think, every live stream. Typically, my favorite book in any series is going to be the one right before the last one. So, for example, Harry Potter, my favorite book is Half-Blood Prince. Hunger Games, my favorite book is Catching Fire. In this book, or in Percy Jackson, of the original 5, my favorite is Battle of the Labyrinth. And my reasons why is I think it's a fun adventure. It still gives us kind of that quest feel that I like out of most of the Percy Jackson books that we don't really get in the 5th one. But at the same time, it's where the characters are the most mature prior to that. So it's the most mature of these quests that we have in the original series, and that's why I think I enjoy it the most. Maria asks, what do you think of the Nick Hornby books? For example, A Long Way Down. I'm not super familiar with the Nick Hornby books. I've never read them personally. I believe my wife has read a few of them. So I can't honestly give my opinions on them at the moment, but I'll add them to my list if that's something you guys are interested in me reading on the channel. Let's go to a question from Alwyn J. Ferreira, who says, currently reading the Maze Runner books in chronological order. Would you do them? I'd love to hear your impressions as Stephen/Thomas. Yes, the Maze Runner is one of those books I'm working on in my free time at the moment. I don't have a release date yet. I'm maybe about a quarter of the way through the book. If I don't finish it by the time that... So how I work, right, is I kind of schedule out all of these books chapter by chapter until I'm done with all of these series that you guys have requested. And right now, it's like a 15-year kind of project. But I do tend to do more than one chapter a day. And try to drop these every so often. So, for example, like you guys are seeing Among the Free and Among the Hidden coming out, or Among the Enemy has already come out, Among the Free is coming up very soon. And those are just kind of side books that I've dropped without having to do them as full daily chapter books. So right now the Maze Runner is scheduled to become a daily chapter book early next calendar year. My guess is I will finish the first one before then, and then it'll drop all at once. But if not, then expect it to start kind of by the end of this calendar year, otherwise early next year. But yes, I am intending on doing it as soon as we are done with Divergent. Gold Roger says, can you read The Three-Body Problem? It's an amazing read. I am not familiar with The Three-Body Problem. I will have to check it out and maybe add it to my list. Same goes for this question by Tchaikovsky, who asks, can you please do the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie? Hopefully we're back. Double checking here. Apologize for that. I was talking about, let's see here. The question was about DC or Marvel novels. I get requested to do a lot of graphic novels. The issue with doing graphic novels as audiobooks is you need rights to the artwork, which we don't have. And it's very difficult to then do an audiobook medium because most of the context and exposition in a graphic novel, of course, comes from the artwork, as opposed to, a straight narrative where you can read through the character's thoughts process and that sort of thing. But in terms of the adaptations, maybe if you guys were to give me specific examples. So for example, like Star Wars has 15 billion books in the Star Wars universe, but you guys are pretty clear about which ones you guys want me to read on the channel. I've already done the 6 Jedi Prince novels. I'm intending on doing the Thrawn trilogy fairly soon. So if there are specific books in the DC or Marvel kind of catalog that you guys want me to read, then maybe I'd consider adding them to the list. Cringe on YouTube asks, are you planning on eventually going through the entire Bible? Yes, I'm about halfway through it at the moment. There are a lot of chapters in the Bible, 66 books, of course, and in the just kind of the general Protestant Bible, and then eventually I will also do the Catholic Apocrypha, working on like kind of additional Christian-ish material, kind of in like the Book of Mormon, that sort of thing. But yes, the Bible itself, the 66-book Protestant Canon Bible, I'm hoping to have done by next summer. It will be about a 3-year process. And so I have 3 of the 4 Gospels done right now. I'm working on finishing up John, and then I will work on finishing up through the New Testament, and then working backwards into what I don't have finished yet of the Old Testament. So I believe the next full book to drop on the channel will be Revelation, coming up sometime this month, but I'm not entirely sure. But yes, my intention is to do the entire Bible eventually. Rebecca Messer says, when will you be doing the Maze Runner series? I just mentioned that a few minutes ago. So Maze Runner is, I'm currently working on it, but it will become a daily chapter book by the end of this year. And what that means is it'll start airing daily chapters like we do on this channel by the end of this calendar year. There is a chance that I get done with the entirety of the book before it hits that schedule, in which case the full series, or the full first book will drop, and then we'll skip ahead then to the second book. But yes, it is coming up after we're done with both Aragon and Divergent, both of those series. Question from Axel Christensen, who asks, or who says, I would love to hear Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. It is on my list. Brandon Sanderson and Brandon Mull are 2 Mormon authors named Brandon, who I have on my list. We've already done Fablehaven, which is the first of the Fablehaven books over on Patreon and Vimeo. For copyright purposes, we cannot have them here, but the intention is to have the full series up eventually over on Patreon and Vimeo for free for you. So if you want to check those out, you're more than welcome to do so. Once we're done with the Fablehaven series, then I will move on from Brandon Mull to do Brandon Sanderson. Expogo Sam says, is Chapter 25 of The Radiation Effect the first mention of the lab? Can you say if there's any correlation between the lab, Atlas, and whatever department of the IREA killed Johnny's dad? Good question. I'm going to answer it the most spoiler-free way I can. The answer to the first question, is it the first mention of the lab? Yes. The laboratory in Guyana that they're maybe about to go on a mission towards has never been mentioned before. That being said, there are elements from the lab that we may have seen elsewhere, or things have been hinted at elsewhere, and that'll make a lot more sense by the end of the book once we are already through the lab. If we see it in person, I'm not going to spoil anything. You guys can probably figure it out based on what I'm explaining. Can you say if there's any correlation between the lab, Atlas, and whatever department of the IREA killed Johnny's dad? Yes and no. I'm not going to tell you which one, but I will say there may be a fourth party in there that you've already seen that you're maybe not considering because the information hasn't connected it yet. But that's all I'll say on that matter. So there may be some answers. There may be some more questions about Johnny's dad, or like you said, the correlation with Atlas or the IREA and that sort of thing. So I'm not gonna. Expogo Sam says, is it a clone lab? I'm not gonna answer anything yet. You will find out in a few upcoming chapters. I believe chapter 29 or 30 is when, I think it's chapter 30 is when we will see the next mission from the group. So that will hopefully be answered in a couple months or so. Let's go to a question from Chandler M, who says, will you do Song of Achilles and Circe? I am not super familiar with that book, so maybe let me check that out and see if it's something worth adding to my list. KSJ says, how about the Spiderwick Chronicles? Spiderwick Chronicles is another one of those series we have already done in full. So we've already done the Hunger Games. Of course, the Hunger Games does have a 5th book coming out in March that we will do eventually, but all of those books are currently available, not here on YouTube for copyright purposes, but available over on Patreon and Vimeo completely for free. So if you want to check out any of those links, in the description below, you're more than welcome to do so. The Hunger Games is complete. The Harry Potter series we've already done, that's complete over there too. And then, like you said, Spiderwick Chronicles, we're working on Fablehaven. Eventually, Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones will be up over there as well. So if you want to check those out without missing them, because they won't be available on the channel here, feel free to do so. Those will be available for free. Expogo Sam says, can't wait to have my July ruined when you know who dies again. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. You'll enjoy it. It'll be a good time. The questions that Expogo Sam has been asking is about the Radiation Effect, which is my personal book. If you guys are new to the channel or unfamiliar, I am writing a book as we kind of do all of our other stuff. And every time I finish a chapter, I record it and then upload it to the channel. So if you want to check that out, if you're interested, it's called The Radiation Effect. It's got a big red thumbnail as its graphic. You can find it in the channel playlist below. And if you're interested in learning more or joining the discussion about it, we have a discussion page over on our Discord channel. Links are available in the description below, as well as where was I going with this thought? We have a wiki page too, which is also available in the description below. Cringe on YouTube says, in Singer of Apollo, you said Annabeth instead of a specific god. If you don't know what I'm referring to, I'll take it as a no, but was that intentional? Yes. The Singer of Apollo is a very inconsequential story in the Percy Jackson kind of greater mythos. It's a little short story that Rick Riordan wrote, and I did, in fact, insert Annabeth's name in a place of another Greek god for the sake of a comedic effect. I do that quite a bit, actually. So the backstory to why I add little Easter eggs or change text is because when I started this channel and when this channel started getting really popular, people started re-uploading my videos. So they would take my videos and basically re-upload them on their own channel, thinking that I had done the same with someone else's recording. Obviously, you guys see me on camera. Hi, my name's Ty. This is me. This is my channel. Everything on this channel is my own recording. I don't use AI to use my own voice to fix anything, but regardless, people were stealing my content and uploading it as their own. And in order to help track that down a little easier, I decided not to just use the text that is from cover to cover, because first of all, I make a lot of mistakes already. And so in doing that, I will occasionally drop the channel name, so people are listening on another channel and they hear that, they go, oh, this might be stolen content. Let's see where this came from. But I also, whether or not I get bored is kind of irrelevant nowadays, but sometimes if I'm reading and I go, oh, this would be funny to add here, then I do something like that. So yes, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I did that for comedic effect. Seems to have gone over well. Some people really enjoy it, some people really hate it. I don't know. Let's go to a question from Switchside, who says, this is insane. Do you really record these for 8 hours straight? The answer is no. I record one chapter at a time, and typically when I'm done with all of the chapters in a book, then I will compile them into a full version and upload them at whatever length it is. So for example, the longest full audiobook that I have available is Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which I didn't separate into parts. But Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is, I believe, 12 hours long. And I did not do that complete. I did all 30-some chapters separately, and then I compiled them into one big reading. So typically I spend about 3 to 4 hours a night recording and editing audiobooks. I definitely don't have the time to do it all straight, but that's kind of my process. So, for example, on this channel right now, we're doing daily chapters of the second book in the Trials of Apollo, The Dark Prophecy. Once all 40-some of those chapters are out on the channel, then we'll compile them into a full version, which will be available on our other channel, which helps kind of save a little litigation when it comes to copyright, that sort of thing. Let's go to a question from Brigo, who says, can you do Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings next? Yes, I've just mentioned I've already done Harry Potter. You can find it on Patreon and Vimeo for free. In terms of Lord of the Rings, I'm going to start with The Hobbit because it's a little easier to get through. It's a little shorter, significantly shorter, and it's also more fun for me to read. I enjoy The Hobbit. This is going to sound bad. I do enjoy reading The Hobbit a lot more than I enjoy reading Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is just a little bit too tedious for my liking. Some people are really into it and really into all the descriptions that J.R.R. Tolkien gives to his characters. I'm a little less like that. It's not that I don't have the attention span for it. I just don't really care to read about a dinner scene for 5 pages, if that makes any sense. So yes, I will do The Hobbit first. I'm currently through a few chapters, and eventually, hopefully, in the next few months or so, hopefully The Hobbit is available for you guys over on Patreon and Vimeo, and then eventually we'll also move on to Lord of the Rings. Let's go to a question from Rabab Sultana, who says, can you please make the Land of Stories? I don't know if I'm familiar with the Land of Stories. I feel like it's been requested before, in which case I can bump it up on my list, but I'll double check to see if that's the one I'm thinking about, and maybe add that to my list if it's not already there. Few people are asking about the Chronicles of Narnia. Andra Chauhan and Panda Poison are asking, what happened to the Chronicles of Narnia series? Or where is the Chronicles of Narnia? I was reading that. That is another one of those that is not available on YouTube, but is available over on Patreon and Vimeo for free. So we have the entire 7-book series finished. The reason it's not on YouTube is because Lionsgate, or I actually can't remember who's producing the upcoming Narnia film series. But typically when a new film series comes into production, the production company locks down on YouTube channels that are using that content, whether it can be defended in court or not. And YouTube's copyright policies favor those who own the copyright rather than the users who are using the copyright for fair use. And so in the case of, like, Lionsgate was the one who came after us for Hunger Games because of the new film, the new book coming out. And then, yeah, Narnia the same way, same with Fablehaven, that sort of thing. So we've just moved everything to a separate site. It's still free, but Patreon and Vimeo, if you guys want to go check those out or continue where you were at. Christian Daniel Diakonescu says, I would love to see you do anything by Brandon Sanderson. Amaya Duick says, I would love to see Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. I mentioned this maybe 5-10 minutes ago, but yes, my intention is to do Brandon Sanderson as soon as we're done with Brandon Mull. So Brandon Mull is the Fablehaven author. We'll do at least the 5 Fablehaven books, maybe the full 10-book dual series, but then we'll move on over to Mistborn will probably be where we'll start with Brandon Sanderson. Let's go to a question from So Tries, who asks, I know it's very long, but could you do the Throne of Glass series or Dark Rise? I believe it's already on my list. I will double check, because I don't think you're the first person to suggest Throne of Glass, but I will see where it's at on my list and see if I can't bump it up a little bit. Scorpion King asks, will you do the 39 Clues? I've been asked this quite a bit, and my immediate answer is to say no. Because of the fact that there's a lot of books in that series, and I don't want to commit to something that I can't promise. For example, okay, so with Percy Jackson and Harry Potter, I started reading those on the channel because I personally wanted to. I very, very much enjoy those stories. There's 8, almost 19 books in the Percy Jackson expanded universe and saga, that sort of thing. And then you got all of Rick Riordan's other books, and so this has been a very long process. I've enjoyed it for the most part, but I do feel a little bit of a burnout every once in a while. And if I were to do that on a series that is even longer and one that I'm not as familiar with, I don't want to commit to something like that. In the 39 Clues, same thing goes for Warrior Cats. People request that one a lot. Those are 2 series that I'm not going to give a definitive yes or no at the moment because I don't know that I can commit myself to them the way that you guys maybe want me to. Cringe on YouTube says, do you read in your free time outside of your recordings? Yes, not nearly as much as I used to. One reason I wanted to start this channel and one benefit of having this channel is that most of what I want to read, I now do as an audiobook. So it helps gratify my reading in a way that is concrete, if that makes any sense. So when I sit down to read, for example, maybe a lot of you have dyslexia or ADHD or this sort of thing. When you sit down to read, maybe it's difficult for you guys to focus, or maybe you start jumping around paragraphs and then you kind of get distracted. One thing that helps me read with this channel is it helps me to go line by line if I'm reading it out loud. And in addition to that, not only do I get to read these books and remember them, but then I have a product when I'm done that I can then give to other people, which is something that I really much enjoy. So most of my reading, I would say about 80 to 85% of it happens on this channel, whether you guys see it or not. I mean, there's plenty of books that are not done yet that you guys haven't seen, or maybe I haven't even given them out to you, or maybe I won't give out to you. But I do tend to record everything that I read most of the time. Godspeed Beats says, have you done Adventures Wanted? If not, would you do it? I don't know that I'm familiar with Adventures Wanted. I will check it out and see if it's something I want to add to the list. Dark Puppet says, have you seen my last comments? You said hello, Echo. I don't know if you've left anything else in the chat here. Let's go to a question or a comment from Jinho Park, who says, I would love to hear The Outsiders on your channel. I think someone suggested that last week as well. One thing that I would like to do, if I have the time to do it, and that's the big key, is do I have the time to do it, is to do more books on the channel that are kind of that 6th grade through 12th grade reading list in school type books. You know what I'm talking about? The ones that you have to read over the summer or maybe are reading in class. I think that would be beneficial to those of you who need them for classes, or those of you who, it would help get traction on the channel as well, and maybe it's your way into these stories in a way that maybe you wouldn't get if you had to read them on your own, if that makes any sense. So I like The Outsiders would be one of them. Flowers for Algernon is another big one that I can think of. Call of the Wild has been requested quite a few times. But yeah, that sort of thing. Do apologize. I'm going to moderate something in the chat. Let's see here. Let's go to a question from Neil Peterson, who says, could you do the Golden Compass series or The Magicians by Lev Grossman? Golden Compass, if you guys are on, or his Dark Materials is a series that has been requested quite a bit on this channel. And I have to say it every time it's asked. I will not be doing anything by Philip Pullman on this channel for personal reasons. Philip Pullman has said some things about people like me that are make me uncomfortable reading his stuff on the channel. His whole purpose in life, that his self-professed purpose in life, is counterintuitive to the way that I live my life, for lack of a better explanation. And so for that reason, I don't think it's worth my time to read his stories on the channel. So there are plenty of other audiobook mediums that you would be able to find those. Of course, there's a TV series if you're interested, but Philip Pullman is not an author that I will be reading on this channel. As for The Magicians by Lev Grossman, yes, I do intend to read that eventually. If you guys have never seen The Magicians TV show, that's another good TV show. It's almost Harry Potter-ish, for lack of a better explanation, but eventually, yes, hopefully we'll get to that. Let's see here. Roblox Squad says, I love your content. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Dark Puppet says, I mean in your videos, I think I commented on your latest chapter 15. I think I did see that. The PJO Swifty says, can you read The Hunger Games? I have already read The Hunger Games. They are available on Patreon and Vimeo completely for free, but all 4 of those books should be available to you for free if you click one of those links below. Lunamoo16 says, are you going to do more stuff from Rick Riordan? The goal is to do every single one of his book series. So we have done 3 out of the 5. We are currently on the 4th one. I am currently reading the 4th of the Trials of Apollo books. You can find the first one available on the channel. You can find books 2 and 3 over on Patreon. And eventually we will get to all of those on the YouTube channel as well. And then after that, of course, then we will do Magnus Chase. Let's see here. Excuse me. Ambreen Shahryar says, please do the Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. Moonlight Wolf also asks, can you do the Inheritance Games? Yes. I'm not familiar with that series, but it has been requested quite a bit, so it's pretty high up on my list. Of course, this is different from the Inheritance Cycle, which is the Aragon series, but the Inheritance Games is a series that has been asked for quite a bit, and am hoping to get to sometime in the next year or two. Ashley Garcia says, will you read more of the Bible, please? I listen to it when I go to sleep. Yes, I mentioned earlier on the stream, my goal is to have the entirety of the Bible finished by next summer. Not this coming summer, but the summer of 2026. It will be about a 3-year project. I am getting fairly close to being done with the New Testament. I still have to finish a few chapters in the Gospel of John, finish Acts, and then there are 1 or 2 of the epistles that I have yet to finish in just in their entirety. And then we'll go through the long process is going to be getting through not just the Old Testament, but specifically the Torah. The Torah is tedious to read. It's fairly long. So we'll get through them eventually, hopefully. Maria says, have you ever considered reading Vampirates from Justin Somper? I have not. I don't know that I'm familiar with it, but I'll check it out. Roblox Squad says, would you maybe read the Wings of Fire series? Yes. Where's it at here? It's on my list. Not just on my list, but it is literally in the pile behind me that I have been reading through. So I am, I've already recorded the first 1 or 2 chapters of it and am hoping to have it out to you guys eventually, but I am actively working on it. Arabelle says, you have a really good reading voice. Thank you very much. That's part of why I started this channel. I appreciate it. Cringe on YouTube says, would you be interested in doing theological books after the Bible? For instance, some of C.S. Lewis's works. Definitely Mere Christianity has been on my list for a while. My goal originally was to just finish Chronicles of Narnia and then move on to Mere Christianity. A lot of other things have come up to get in the way of that. But yes, eventually once I'm done with specifically the main Bible, I'm going to move on to the Catholic Apocrypha as well as the Book of Mormon. And then once I'm done with that, then I'll probably do some more theological books, that sort of thing. Let's go to a question from Josie Reeds, who says, it's fairly niche, but there's an old series I used to love called Circle of Mages by Tamara Pierce. That or Skullduggery Pleasant, but I know that's not entirely family friendly. That is not always a red flag. There's a lot on Patreon that is not on YouTube that it's not really family friendly either. So that's something that is on my list that could be done eventually. Circle of Mages, I think, has been requested before. I don't know if it was you or someone else, but I will definitely check it out. It's not something I'm familiar with, but I may bump that up in the channel or in the request list if that's something you guys are interested in listening to. Nayli Dutra says, I would love some Song of Ice and Fire. I am currently working on finishing up Game of Thrones. I have the first 47 chapters of Game of Thrones available. There's 73 chapters. The first 60% of that book is already out over on Patreon. I put a chapter out every week. And then Fire and Blood, which is the prequel book that House of the Dragon is based off of, I am through about 70% of. And that comes out maybe once a month to about 6 weeks. So that another chapter that should be coming out next. If not, no, it came out today, I believe, on Patreon as well, if you want to go check that out. Lunamoo16 says, do you think you would want to do Pages & Co. by Anna James? I don't know that I'm familiar with Pages & Co. I will check that out as well and see if that's something worth adding to the list. Luke Donnelly says, are you going to do the rest of a series of unfortunate events? Yes, the second book should come out a week from today. I'm recording this on Tuesday, February 11th. I believe it's scheduled to come out something like 10 a.m. Central Time a week from today. So book 2 will be available then, and then it'll be about every 2 to 3 months you'll see a new book. There's 13 books in the series. Each book has 13 chapters, except the last one has an extra chapter. It's 13, 13, 13, 13, that sort of thing. So, and he obviously did that on purpose. But, yeah, I am eventually hoping to do all 13 books in that series. Ryan Peterson says, was probably not the most popular, but finishing Artemis Fowl would be cool. I do think it's due a TV remake in the next few years as well. They just came out with a TV series within the last 5 years, so I wouldn't get your hopes up on another adaptation. But yes, Artemis Fowl. So how I kind of weigh things on the channel, right, is if it's something I've never done, if it's a series that I've never done any of the installments for on the channel, everything is kind of weighed by how much it's been requested, how much I want to do it, if it's one of the books that I've wanted to read, and that sort of thing. And then it just kind of goes down in a list like that. When it comes to the series that I've already put books out for on the channel, so for example, The Giver, the Shadow Children, the Missing series, anything that I already have installments of, but the series is not finished on the channel. How I typically weigh my priority in doing that is how many views on average each one of those videos has. Artemis Fowl is second up there only to Dune. So of all of the active series that I'm working on at the moment, apart from Rick Riordan's type stuff, Dune has an average of, I want to say, 30,000 views on each of my Dune videos. So Dune is at the top of my priority list at the moment, probably because it's so popular due to the films. But Artemis Fowl is second, which is kind of interesting. So the second book in that series is called The Arctic Incident, and it's in the pile to my immediate left here that I'm looking at. I am currently working on it. I'm hoping to have it out by May, I believe, the second book. There's 6 or 7 in the original series, I want to say. So hopefully we will get to that and finish it fairly soon. But yeah, the second book should be coming up in the next few months here. Cringe on YouTube says, is this where you record your audiobooks? It is. This is my just basement studio. It's this tiny little, it used to be like my house used to be like a split level duplex, and now it's just like a full house. And so this is one of the kitchens that is no longer a kitchen, which is kind of interesting. But it's this little tiny space that I've soundproofed, and yeah. The audio quality is a lot better than it was when I started the channel. I don't know if you guys can notice that, but yes, this is my studio. Maria says, DC question, who is your favorite Robin? It's a good question. In terms of live action Robins, no, you're probably talking which of the 4 characters. Probably Dick Grayson. I don't know that I could give you a reason. I don't know if I could give you a reason. I would probably say Dick Grayson. In terms of like the live action actors to play Robin, Robin's not really appeared much on any of the like the DC films, so I think by default it has to be for the life of me the name's escaping me. Whoever played him in the 90s. I would say Joseph Gordon-Levitt is probably my favorite actor of all of the people who have played Robin on screen, but good question. Flick Street Productions is in the chat. Good to see you there. Let's go to a question from Scorpion King, who asks, question for you. Didn't Percy take a dip in the river Styx in the Titan's Curse? I don't understand how Tartarus isn't a cakewalk for him and how he's able to almost die there. I want to say it was in Last Olympian that he actually took the dip in the Styx. But what you're referring to is the curse, or the Achilles. Basically, he's invincible, right? And the question is, why is he no longer invincible? The reason he's no longer invincible comes in the second book in the Heroes of Olympus series. The Son of Neptune, which is the first of the Heroes of Olympus books that Percy is in. And basically what happens is, in order to get into Camp Jupiter, you have to cross the Little Tiber, which is this kind of water barrier. Camp Half-Blood, of course, has the camp barriers. Camp Jupiter has this river that surrounds it. And as you go through the river, it basically takes away any enchantments, which includes magical protections, which includes like magical curses, that sort of thing. And so when he crosses over, when he makes the conscious decision to give up all of his past type stuff in order to get across to Camp Jupiter, that includes his Achilles curse. And so Percy is no longer invincible, tongue-tied. Percy is no longer invincible after the beginning of Son of Neptune because he makes the choice to carry Juno into Camp Jupiter rather than stay away and continue being invincible. Does that make any sense? Flick Street Productions says, radiation effect question. Given Pema Tanner's importance in Andrew's life, I'm curious to know when we will be seeing her appearance in the books. That's a good question. I can't give you a definitive answer at the moment because I don't know that I have decided on a definitive moment at all. She will. I just don't exactly know when. When I started writing this book specifically, the first book, Andrew is kind of the lesser of Emma's two brothers, even though he's the older one, and he's the one that appears in the first book. The interesting thing about their relationship, though, is that she's so close with her other brother that Andrew kind of gets put to the wayside. And there's a bit of a tragedy in that because it's not just her who does that. Most of her family kind of shuns Andrew as the oldest sibling. And there's a little bit of a secret tragedy in that because he is always looking for other people's approval and attention. And tied into that is this relationship that he has with a woman named Pema Tanner. So Andrew, by the end of the first book, is 18 years old. But it's hinted at the beginning of the book that he has been in this on and off relationship with a woman who works at the embassy who is 10 years his senior. And it's been going on for a bit of time, to the point where by the time we read in chapter 25, he is pretty much obsessed with her, to the point that it's affecting all of his other relationships, his ability to be away from her, and to spoil chapter 25 for those of you who haven't read it yet, Andrew is willing to give up his entire future, political or otherwise, because of the fact that he wants to stay in Tylersville instead of going to college because he's so linked to this woman, which is, really sad. But for those of you who have been in relationships like that, it has an impact on you in a way that is not just, I don't know how to describe it. It's a very, comes from a place of kind of a predatory relationship, but has affected him and probably her in such a way that they're tied in a way that is almost inseparable. And we will see how that happens in the future, how that affects him mentally, that sort of thing, if he's forced to move on from it. It's hinted in this chapter that his parents do in fact know about it, despite doing nothing about it. And so it's, yeah, we'll see going forward how it affects him more than seeing her personally. But we will see her in the future. I'm very, very excited to explore that storyline in one of the future editions. Maria says, when you write your radiation effect chapters, do you first write an outline for them? Not specifically, and I've mentioned this on the Discord channel before. One issue I have is I'm a huge fan of, or rather, I hate when screenwriters or authors shorten conversations and make them jump around in a way that is inorganic. And my fault in trying to correct that in my writing is most of my conversations then end up being a lot longer than I intend them to be because I want them to flow organically. So for example, if I plan on having 3 separate conversations in a chapter and intending this chapter to be about 10-15 pages long, they have a habit of expanding to about 20 to 25 pages, which is frustrating for me because I don't want the book to then become overinflated, but I like having all of this little character work and that sort of thing and the organic conversations that I have. So I typically don't write an outline for them. When I start a chapter, it's typically I know where I want it to end up, but I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to get there. Let's see here. Flick Street Productions says, I always imagine Margot's wavy blonde hairstyle to be long, wild, and untamed, similar to Merida's in Pixar's Brave. Interesting. I definitely wasn't intending that when I wrote it. When I think of long and wavy, I just think she's got a strong texture to it. She's a lot more conventionally attractive than Emma is, which is a source of Emma's insecurity. Emma's is a little more ratty. I would say Emma of the two has more of the untamed hair. Hers is a little more kind of yellowish golden than Margot's, which is more of a platinum blonde. But let's go to a question from Slick Draws. A couple different questions here. Slick Draws asks, can you do Fablehaven by Brandon Mull? And Joe VC says, can you read Fablehaven, please? Yes, I have already done the first book. It's available over on Patreon and Vimeo for free, but you guys are more than welcome to check them out there with the description or with the link in the description below. Otherwise, just be patient. I am working on the second one as we speak. Let's go to a question from a few more people. Roblox Squad says, will you do The Dark Prophecy by Rick Riordan? It's the second book in the Trials of Apollo. David asks, can you please do The Dark Prophecy? And Nick Fair says, where is book 2? Good question. So book 2 is currently available in full over on Patreon. It's $5 a month if you guys are interested in skipping ahead. We also have book 3 available in full now over on Patreon. So if you guys want to jump ahead of the channel by about 2 months, it's $5 a month. You can join with the description below, leading you to Patreon. The second book is currently airing chapters here on this channel, Echo Wirm Audiobooks. This is our daily channel. Once we are done with all 40-something chapters in The Dark Prophecy, then it'll be compiled into a full version that, like I said, is currently available on Patreon. That'll be available on our channel, Echo Wirm. So every 40-some days or so, or however many days it takes to get through the book chapter by chapter, that's how long it'll take to get to Echo Wirm, the full channel. Let's see here. Meaningless Standard says, speaking of Margot, can you tell us when her background/arc will be expanded on? If you wouldn't mind expanding on your own question, what do you mean specifically with her background? Are you interested in learning more about why she left Canada? Just kind of, so Margot's backstory, for those of you who maybe aren't super familiar with the story, she was the victim of domestic abuse and very likely sexual domestic abuse early in her childhood, to the point where the family, her mother disappeared, and then her father was arrested, and then she was taken into custody, not just by the Quebec authorities, but then because of her status as a member of the company, was taken into custody of the company in Canada. She and her two siblings were separated for reasons that I am not going to spoil at the moment. So yes, I do intend to expand on why they were separated and why they cannot live together or why the company is preventing them from living within close proximity to each other. But I don't exactly know when. It will be in a later book. It won't be in this book. There is a significant amount of plot developments for Margot that has yet to happen in the book. So you guys can speculate on what that is. I won't say whether or not that has to do with her backstory, but Margot's story is not over for this book, but the stuff that you are asking about will probably come in a later book, if that makes any sense. Flick Street Productions says, I think it was clever for Emma to make it up to Xander first, given her role as the mission's leader. Yeah, yes, and, well, okay, so yes in two senses. Yes to what you said. It was, I think, intentional on her part to do Xander first because of the fact that getting into his good graces puts a little less stress on herself when they're doing stuff like missions, because she can feel like she has a partner in the leader. But then in addition to that, with what we know about Xander and what is explained to Emma, because Emma's whole perspective is that Xander hates her after what happened. And in having the conversations in chapter 25 with Jackie White, her counselor, as well as her father, she learns that Xander isn't necessarily mad at her because he hates her. He's mad at her because he sees her making the wrong decisions and he's powerless to stop it. And so he's disappointed in her, and that's where his frustration with her comes from. And so, in a way, Xander is almost the easiest to get back on her side because she simply has to prove to an adult that she is willing to change. Whereas with the others in the squad, it's going to be significantly more difficult if you've ever been in bad graces with your friends in high school. It's going to take a lot more convincing of them that you can change than it is for an adult to see that you are starting to make the right decisions, if that makes any sense. Cringe on YouTube says, thoughts on Dumbledore's character? Was his slow guiding of Harry to his seemingly inevitable death justified, especially since at least between book 2 and 4 he believed Harry would have to die? Yeah, Dumbledore is probably my favorite character in all of Harry Potter, which is not like a lot of people think that. It's either Dumbledore or Voldemort for me. Was he justified? That's a good question, because what we learn in book 6 and 7, specifically book 7, is that Dumbledore knew that Harry needed to be sacrificed, but he wasn't expecting to feel the human connection with Harry that ended up happening. And so it's almost one of those, like, I'm trying to think of another good story. If there's any type of media that you can think of where the best option for a character is to sacrifice another character. So, for example, I'm watching The Walking Dead right now. And at the end of Walking Dead Season 3, Rick has to come to terms with putting everyone else in his camp in danger to go to war with the governor. Or he can sacrifice Michonne to the governor because that's who the governor wants. The governor claims that he will not go to war with Rick's group if Rick hands over Michonne. So does Rick put the rest of his family at danger in order to protect Michonne, or does he sacrifice Michonne? So with Dumbledore, it's that, but as with Rick and his relationship with Michonne, he doesn't expect to feel the connection with that character that he does. And so Dumbledore, is he justified? Yes, because his understanding and his correct assumption is that in order to kill, or in order to rid the world of Voldemort, he needs to sacrifice Harry. Is he justified in that? I think yes, depending on, which circle of thought you come from. Is it the lesser of two evils to sacrifice the boy for the good of the world? Yes. Dumbledore's problem, and the reason he makes some very poor decisions, is he didn't expect to have the relationship with Harry that he does. And so in forcing Harry to do all of these things, because of the errors that he made in falling in, it sounds kind of bad because it's an adult-child relationship, but falling in love, a paternal love for Harry, it complicates things significantly. So yes, is he justified? Yes, but it's very complicated. Flick Street Productions says, I believe that the entire squad will have to give apologies. Emma for what she's done, Margot for calling Emma the S word, Johnny for stonewalling Margot, Jordan and Kent before disappearing. Yeah, that to me the last one is the most interesting one. Is how is Johnny? So keep in mind, like Jordan is very, very caught up about the fact that Johnny's missing. But you got to remember that before they left, Johnny hadn't spoken to his brother in 3 months. And so there's going to be a complex set of emotions there in when the two are reunited. If the two are reunited, is their relationship going to pick up where it left off in October? Or are the things that affected them from October to January then going to be in effect too? It's an interesting dynamic, and it's not one that I did on accident. Flick Street Production says, and Margot for her somewhat controlling and clingy behavior towards Jordan and letting her anger towards Emma affect him. To me, above all else, that's the most important one. So we're talking about justification of characters. Is Margot justified in her behavior against Emma and how controlling she is to Jordan because of the things that have happened with Emma and with her family and with the Garens and that sort of thing? Is she justified in that? To me, that's the most interesting question, and one that we'll see play out in a very unexpected and interesting way coming up in a few chapters. Let's go to a question from Slimna Girak, who says, I would love the rest of Artemis Fowl. I mentioned this maybe 10-15 minutes ago, but yes, Artemis Fowl, the second book should come out in a few months here. It's one of the more popular series on the channel that's not finished, so I'm very interested in continuing it and seeing you guys enjoy it. It's also interesting for me because every other book that I've ever recorded on the channel is either my normal American accent or a British accent. Artemis Fowl is the one book series that I have not done either because the author and the characters are Irish, and so I did an Irish accent for the first Artemis Fowl book, and I'm hoping to continue that on through the rest of the series. So, coming out soon, the second book. Question from Matteo Bartholin, who says, can you please do James in the Giant Peach, or Charlie in the Chocolate Factory, or Matilda? Good question, and I think I answered this last week. I'm not a big Roald Dahl fan, so if there's enough demand for it on the channel, then maybe I'll get to it. But I personally just don't really enjoy Roald Dahl, so maybe if there's enough demand for it will be my kind of short answer to that. Anglo says, have you ever gotten into the Lorien Legacy series by Pittacus Lore? I Am Number 4 is the first book. I've read I Am Number 4, and I'm familiar with the movie. It is, in fact, on my list of books to read, and is fairly high up, if I remember correctly. It's not something that I've ever really gotten into beyond that. It's not something that I've looked at in the last 15 years, but it's something that I'd be very interested in revisiting. Flick Street Productions says, to follow up about Dumbledore, he knew Harry's death needed to happen, yet he dreaded needing to tell him because he was scared that Harry's bravery would desert him. Yeah, and that's, like I said, that's all tied into Dumbledore. His big oversight in all of this was not realizing that Harry would have kind of, he thought of him as a pawn in this game, but he didn't quite get the human factor in Harry that ended up happening. Meaningless Standard says, I am interested in Kent's background and his character as a whole. His family, including himself, just seem like a huge wild card. Yeah, especially with his father. He doesn't know his father. His father doesn't know him. But his father is a very, very famous and very, very powerful person who does not know about the company. So the question is, will he play into the story eventually, and how? Because we've already seen how Kent's parentage has not only affected him, but has affected the way other people see him. Not even just within the squad or within the company, but we saw it when they were on mission. When he used his father, he was trying to kind of make a power play against the people that invaded the safe house, and that backfired spectacularly in a way that he wasn't expecting. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out going forward, how his father's influence or even his mother's influence will affect him going forward, what we will see out of him and his relationships with other people based on the background that he has. Kent is probably the most... I don't want to spoil anything, and I don't want to toot my own horn. I think Kent is the most interesting character in the entire series. Save for maybe one. I would say if there's two characters that I think are more interesting than anyone else in the entire series, it's going to be either Kent or Bill Guerin. And you could argue for both that they're the main character. I think Emma's the main character, but some people really don't like that, especially where her character's at the moment. Let's go to a question or a request from Zorena Angel, who says, please finish the series of unfortunate events. I mentioned a few, like 10 minutes ago or so, book 2 comes out on Tuesday next week. And then every 2 to 3 months, you will see another installment of the series. There's 13 total. I'm intending on doing all 13. Excuse me. Flick Street Productions says, I didn't realize that Tate's appearance was inspired by former House Speaker Paul Ryan. Yeah, so Tate Schuler is this character who, he works for the embassy. He's one of Bill Guerin's allies. And he's kind of seen by most of all the politicians in Tylersville. He's probably seen as one of the more trustworthy ones. And so a lot of people respect him and like him, and he's kind of a people pleaser. He never really rocks the boat too far, but he does have his side that he's on. And his role, and specifically his appearance, was based on kind of a combination of all of the speakers of the House that have been in the last 10, 15 years. So specifically, Paul Ryan is kind of the big influence on his appearance, but also the current Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. If you combine those two, there's a fairly good... We used AI artwork for the wiki at the moment, which is a complete other can of worms we'll talk about later. But that AI picture is pretty close to what I've imagined him looking like. Let's see here. Maria says, if you had a character that could choose a future between a loyal soldier, tyrant queen, and sly court diplomat, which would you choose? But your character only sees drawings of possible futures. It's a really good question. Me personally, I believe you're asking which role would I take if I hold on one sec. Could choose a future between loyal soldier and court diplomat, which would you choose? But your character only sees drawings of possible futures. I would personally choose the sly court diplomat. To me, those are the more interesting characters, the behind-the-scenes workers, the ones that you don't really ever see. There are several of them in my story, based on stories that I've read or for example, the two characters that come to mind for me that have inspired the characters in my own story that fall into that are Varys and Littlefinger from Game of Thrones. Or A Song of Ice and Fire. There are other ones. My story is very much based on House of Cards. I think Tim Stamper is a very close character that falls into that kind of archetype. But a very, very interesting question. Anglo says, when I finished the Hunger Games series as a teenager, I also got into the Underland Chronicles. I liked it as much, if not more. Are you planning on going over it too? The Underland Chronicles. Who wrote those? Because I think they're on my list. But I would love, if you want to clarify who wrote that. I think I know which one you're talking about. Flick Street Productions says, I loved the artwork you created for each Nation Ball team. I hope we see the Patriots play the other teams in future books, maybe even travel to them. Yeah, I would love to expand on them. I have logos for most of the international teams, not all of them. I was kind of limited by which languages I was able to input text for in the app that I used for free. But yeah, I am fairly proud of which ones came out for the United States, and I think we'll definitely see more, whether or not it be Nation Ball. I'm definitely in the future books. Margot's a big hockey fan and a big hockey player. Obviously, she wasn't able to play this year given what happened in Chapter 12, but I think going forward, we'll see a lot more competitions between specifically the Western Hemisphere teams, because the way I've imagined it is, in order to avoid major travel costs, they have kind of their divisions, and so we'll see a lot with, people playing Canada, Mexico, the Caribbean, even a little bit over in the United Kingdom, that sort of thing. Anglo says Suzanne Collins. Gregor the Overlander? Is that the series I'm thinking of? Because yes, I'm familiar with those books. I will add it to my list because I own them, and it has not quite been requested as much as I expected it to. Maybe it's because people don't know about the series as much. But yes, I hopefully will get to that eventually as well. Let's go to a question from Aspen Exists and Stuff, who says, I would like to request the Caraval series. I want to say someone suggested that the last time we did a live stream, but I will double check and add that to my list if it's something worth checking out there. Pequeña Fofinia says, when do you plan on starting the Witcher series? I mentioned this last live stream. The Witcher is one of those. I am very excited to read it, and we'll probably get to it as soon as we're done with The Lord of the Rings. A lot of my Eastern European viewers, whether from Poland or not, have been requesting that. I'm going to butcher your pronunciations. I do apologize. But my big question is, do I start with Blood of Elves or do I start with The Last Wish? Because if you know the publishing history of it, especially in the English-speaking world, it's a little confusing on where to start this series because it's kind of confusing. But if you guys have thoughts on where I should start this series, I think that would help me define when I want to start putting it out on the channel. Let's see here. Flickstreet Productions says, I hope we see Margot play hockey and Emma play volleyball in future books. I also hope we see the kids attend a soccer game or two as a former player in my teens. I'm a big soccer fan. You guys see the scars behind me. I'm a big Wickham Wanderers fan. Is probably my favorite football team, if you want to use football instead of soccer. And then I also have a Pacific FC scarf above me that I'm intending on going to see them up in Winnipeg sometime this summer once the schedule comes out. But yes, I do intend on showing that as well in the future. There's going to be, in the future, obviously they have to replace one of the spots in the squad. And in every book, we'll see a little more kind of new people coming into the squad, people from the squad coming out. So the squad's never going to stay the same. Obviously, we've already lost one member. And we will probably lose a member by the end of the book. But I'm not going to spoil anything. But with that, more characters are going to come in that have different interests. There's a musician character that I'm hoping to bring in eventually. Not quite make it from their perspective. For example, like Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, more so than The Hunger Games, is filled with song lyrics and poetry. And one thing I thought would be interesting is once we get to this character and use them as a POV, using their own lyrics and poetry and that sort of thing in kind of the thought processes that they have without making it feel too much of a change from the series. But with that, not just musicians, there are going to be characters from Europe, from elsewhere in the world that come into the squad and are big soccer fans or football fans. And so then we'll see more of their interests kind of shift into that. Question from Cringe on YouTube, who says, mainly Percy Jackson question, are there any voices that you started doing but later regretted? Good question. Not necessarily. That when it comes to me personally, the one that is hardest for me to do is Dumbledore's voice. Dumbledore is a very, very taxing voice that I use. It's an impression of Richard Harris, who is the original actor to play Dumbledore. And it's done in a way that really kills my voice every time I do it. And so I often have to stop and restart every time I do Dumbledore. In terms of like sensitivity, not necessarily. I think the two criticisms that I mostly get are in my Hazel's mom, which that was never intended to be a racial stereotype. Some people really like it, some people really don't like it, and the people that don't like it have said that it sounds like a stereotype. That was never the intention. It was supposed to be a Louisiana Bayou accent, rather than just kind of a black caricature, which some people see it as. So I don't necessarily regret that one as much as maybe Frank's grandmother. I think I went a little too overboard with the caricature, which was never the intention. It was never supposed to be insensitive. It was supposed to be Frank imitating his grandmother in a way that he saw her as, if that makes any sense. So just for the sake of me being a white narrator, I committed to certain voices and did them. And I would say if there's one that I wish I would have gone back and changed and maybe not done the way I did, probably Frank's grandma. Good question from Maria, who says, why are USA soccer fans so tame when cheering? It's a cultural thing. So in the United States, obviously, soccer is very, very unpopular compared to other sports. And it's just the history of it. So in England, all of these sports come from the same background, right? If you know the history of association football and even rugby, they all kind of come from the same place. And football, in the rugby sense, got very, very popular in the United States in the early 1900s and eventually developed into American football. And so American football and basketball kind of have a dominance on the American sports scene. Baseball is still very popular because of its history in the United States. Hockey is getting more popular. I'm a big hockey fan. I grew up playing hockey. But like I will not shy away from the fact that hockey is easily the fourth most popular sport in the Big Four. Soccer has always been kind of this fifth weird side sport. And the interesting thing about the United States is because of the fact that soccer was never super popular, the people that engaged with soccer have always been those fans of sports that aren't really into sports. Does that make any sense? And so soccer fans in the United States are typically the fans that aren't hardcore enough to cheer for anything else, if that makes any sense. Because if you weren't a big soccer fan, or if you didn't focus on soccer, you'd be focused on anything else. And so it's kind of these outlier fans that are typically the big MLS fans or even like USL fans. And so it's going to be more of your unathletic types that are typically cheering for soccer games. Soccer in the United States, specifically MLS, has a very, very distinct fan base, and that's kind of the backstory to it and why people don't really engage with soccer, and why our fans compared to fans elsewhere are a lot weaker. It's because the people that are cheering for soccer typically are fans of a sport where they didn't grow up cheering for anything else. So, if that answers your question. It's a very, very historical answer. Meaningless Standard says, did the radiation effect gene come into existence post, pre, or during World War II? They started the testing during World War II, and the first effect showed up right after the war, or almost right kind of at the end of the war. So you could argue maybe during, but the real popularization of the effects came 1946, 1947. Flick Street Production says, every time I play Call of Duty games, I imagine some of the radiation effect characters in them. Interesting. Not because I think that's weird. It's because every time I'm playing Call of Duty, I'm imagining the characters in those situations. Does that make any sense? So it's kind of the opposite of what you're doing. I often will use, especially when I'm writing action scenes or training scenes, I will use scenarios in Call of Duty to influence the action and the choreography of it. So it's interesting that you say that, because that's definitely where I come from in writing those kind of scenes. Let's go to a question from ASB1101, who says, will you do Red Rising? Yes, Red Rising is on my list, and it's one I'm very excited for. I've never actually read it, but I've heard very, very good things from even people close to me. And I think the mythology of it and the backstory of it is very, very intriguing, and I'm excited to do it. I probably will do it after we do the Arc of a Scythe series by Neil Shusterman. But yes, it's coming up eventually. I couldn't tell you exactly when. A few people asking about the Shadow Children series. Tyler S. says, can you do the last Shadow Children book? Darwin says, could you please complete the Shadow Children series? Mr. Mix says, now do Among the Free, please. I do always love when the questions are less questions and more demands. But yes, we just did at the start of this month the 6th book in the Shadow Children series called Among the Enemy. I am currently working on the book titled Among the Free, which is the final 7th book in the series. That should hit the channel on March 1st. So in about 3 weeks' time, you guys will see that air on the channel. And then we will be done with the entire series, which is really cool for me. Hasn't been the easiest series to narrate. I do enjoy the series, but it is very, very repetitive. And it's kind of a weird book to try to narrate. Dune's the same way. I don't necessarily love recording for Dune, but I do love the world that it exists in. I do love reading Dune. It's just a kind of a difficult book to narrate, and I'm not really sure how to explain it. Let's go to a question from Arcane Onino, who says, why is Son of Neptune in second person? It's not. It's in third person. But I'm guessing your question comes from reading a Percy chapter and being confused why it's not in first person. So Heroes of Olympus is distinct from all of the other series in Rick Riordan's catalog because it's the only one that's not in first person, right? So Percy Jackson, Trials of Apollo, and Magnus Chase are all written in this, I did this, I did that, I did whatever. And then the Kane Chronicles are written from a two separate narrator perspective in the understanding that they're audio recordings that have been transliterated. And so what Heroes of Olympus does, distinct from all of those, is that it's written in third person. It still gives you kind of the insight of what all of these characters are thinking, but in order to kind of differentiate it from Percy Jackson, which was it was the first series aside from Percy Jackson that Rick Riordan wrote, he wanted it to feel different and make you not kind of in the headspace of all these characters, but have it from kind of this omniscient narrator perspective. And so he switched it to third person, which is kind of an interesting thing. So that's the reason why, is he wanted it to be distinct from the Percy Jackson series because it's very different. Let's see here. Maria says, what do you think about reading Lovecraft's books? Yeah, Lovecraft is an interesting one. I've always intended to do the Cthulhu mythos on the channel. I tend to mention this all the time. I am one of those who I agree that you should try to separate art from the artist. Obviously, like if you guys are familiar with Harry Potter, obviously there's all the stuff going on with J.K. Rowling. I love Harry Potter, regardless of who wrote it. I think the story is fantastic. I love the themes in it. I love the way it's written. That sort of thing. And I can separate that from all of the things that are going on with the author. The one author, I mentioned this last live stream, the one author that at the moment I'm uncomfortable committing to doing requests from is Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman is an author who has been very popular for many years. You guys will be familiar with Coraline. He's kind of the Tim Burton of authors. He has kind of that Tim Burton vibe, but he's a writer. He has written a lot for Doctor Who, which is one of my favorite shows. He's got a number of TV shows out there that are very distinct. He's got a lot of books that are very distinct. He's got a very distinct writing style, and a lot of people have requested him on this channel. At the moment, I'm not going to commit to anything by Neil Gaiman because of the things that have gone on in his life and have become public about him recently. Now, obviously, they're all allegations. There's no definitive proof, evidence. He's not been specifically arrested or sentenced for any of the stuff that he's allegedly done. But because of the fact that my channel was not built on the popularity of Neil Gaiman, and because of the fact that I have not done any Neil Gaiman yet, I think it would bring more negative attention to my channel and distract people from being able to escape the reality that I hope to have them. My goal for all of you guys is that this channel will constantly become a space for you guys to escape to your favorite books. And so if you guys are, for whatever reason, getting attacked in the comments by someone for something you've said, my goal is always to defend you guys, to delete them out, to make you guys feel like this is a place where you guys cannot be distracted by anything except for these stories. And in the case of Neil Gaiman, at the moment, like I said, because of the things that have gone on, I feel like that would be too much of a distraction. That brings me back to the question about Lovecraft, because Lovecraft is one of those, he's an author that, lived many a decade ago, and has said some very controversial things, did some very controversial things, has written some very controversial things, but at the same time leaves a legacy that is very, very big and impactful and has affected literature in a way that I think is very positive. Of course, you guys will be familiar with, if you know anything about Lovecraft, you probably know what he named his cat. That's not something you do nowadays, and it, looking back retrospectively, looks very, very bad. If there's a way for me to read his stories without having influence of his worldviews in those stories, then yes, I would love to do them. Because I think the Cthulhu mythos specifically is very, very impactful for the world of horror. I would love to do a lot of these original horror stories that he wrote, but I understand that him as a person and him even as just a public figure is very, very controversial and could be distracting to the channel. So if there's a way that I can balance it, I would love to do so. Flickstreet Productions says, for example, I envision all gillied up as a mission with Xander and one of the squad doing. Yeah, I know exactly the level you're talking about. All gillied up is one of the most famous missions in Call of Duty. And may or may not influence a future mission. But I'm not spoiling anything, and I'm not telling you when it's coming up. And it probably won't involve a ghillie suit, but it does influence something coming up later on in the series. Meaningless Standard says, I feel like a similar question has been asked, but what is your favorite mythos? Depends what bounds you're giving on mythos. Are we talking mythology? Are we talking just world building in general? If you're talking just like generic cultural mythologies, Greek is probably my favorite of all of them. I never really got into the Egyptian stuff. My ancestry is Norse, so I am fairly familiar with Norse mythology. I'm familiar with Mesoamerican mythology. Having spent, I shouldn't say a ton of time in Mexico in my life, but being very familiar with Mexico and Central America and having friends down there and knowing that culture. But I would say Greek is probably my favorite. In terms of mythos, just in general world building, because we were talking about the Cthulhu mythos, that sort of thing, I think Game of Thrones is easily the one that I've connected with the most in my life. A lot of people are really big fans of Lord of the Rings and that mythos, the J.R.R. Tolkien world. Some people really like Narnia too. My personal favorite is probably George R.R. Martin and his world, which was influenced by things like Dune and that sort of thing. So yeah, if that answers both sides of how I could read your question, I suppose. Question from Marin Failable, who says, will there also be a long version of The Dark Prophecy once all of the chapters are released? Yes. So however, I mentioned this earlier, however many chapters are in a book, that is how many days it'll take between the last book coming out in full and the next book coming out in full. So for example, the last of the first Trials of Apollo book came out on the channel at the end of January. And I believe Dark Prophecy, which is the second one, will air on the channel early March. I want to say March 3rd or March 5th or one of those. So however many days in between is going to be the number of chapters in that next book. But if you want to jump ahead over on Patreon by about 2 months, you are more than welcome to do so. Link in the description below. It's just $5 a month for all of that access, including downloadable files if you guys ever want to be able to listen to an audiobook on a plane or somewhere that you don't have access to the internet. Or you don't want to, waste money on just kind of your roaming charges, that sort of thing. That is available to you at $5 a month or more. And then another cool thing about the Patreon is if you join for $25 a month or more, which I know is not something everyone can afford, but $25 a month or more, you get to join the book club. And what that means is every month, at the beginning of every month, I send you a free copy, no cost. You don't have to pay anything beyond that $25 a month. I send you a copy of whatever we are reading on the channel. So for example, I just sent out copies of The Tyrant's Tomb, which is the 4th book in the Trials of Apollo series, to all of the members of my book club. Save for one person who specifically requested a signed copy of Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. So I sent that out separately with a little handwritten note in there thanking her for everything that she does for the channel. So if you guys are interested in that, like I said, $25 a month or more is the book club, but $5 a month or more on Patreon skips you ahead of the channel by 2 months, and you also get access to all of those downloadable files. So if that's something you're able to do, maybe you want to consider that. That'd be awesome. Let's go to a question from Little Bit Much, who says, what do I read after The Last Olympian? Really good question. And I'm going to follow that with the question from Panzersaw, who says, does Wrath of the Triple Goddess take place after Son of Neptune? The answer to the second question is yes. And the reason is the order of the series. Rick Riordan wrote them out of order, kind of. Not on purpose. So we have the first 5 Percy Jackson books, which start, of course, with The Lightning Thief and end with The Last Olympian. Then from there, where do we go? Instead of going on to book 6 of Percy Jackson, we're going to go to the first book in the Heroes of Olympus series, which is called The Lost Hero. So it's easy to remember. Last is followed by lost. Basically the same word. Then we do all 5 books of the Heroes of Olympus series that ends with The Blood of Olympus. And then you have a choice. Because the way that they were released is Blood of Olympus into Trials of Apollo. Now, of course, after he got done with Trials of Apollo, Rick Riordan went back and wrote, or is currently writing, 3 new Percy Jackson books. 2 of them are out. The next one should come out by the end of this calendar year. But so we have the first 5 Percy Jackson books, the next 5, the full 5 Heroes of Olympus books, and then chronologically we have the 3 Percy Jackson books after that, starting with Chalice of the Gods, then Wrath of the Triple Goddess, and then Percy Jackson 8, which is not out yet. And then we have, let's see here, the Trials of Apollo books, and then we have The Sun and the Star, which is the Nico D'Angelo book. Question from, or comment from Flick Street Productions, who says, I hope to see more Muse references in the Radiation Effect books. I'll keep that in mind. Maybe I'll add 1 or 2 more in there for you by the end of this book. There's not a ton in there. Mom Plaisir says, Kevin De Bruyne. If you're referring to me, yes, I do bear a passing resemblance to Kevin De Bruyne. But I do have a Man City scarf over here that I got at a Man City Chelsea match. So let's go to a question from Captain Rex, who says, can you put in chapter markers? I was mid-chapter when your full video version came out. There should be links in the description of every full version of each book that have the timestamps there. I don't know why they don't always translate up to the top. So when you're reading or you're listening through the video, it should tell you which chapter you're on. I don't know why it doesn't always translate up to the top. But if you go down to the description of every video, you should be able to find chapter stamps there and skip ahead if you need to. Question from Trevor Schlegel, who says, I would love to hear you do Dune Messiah and Children of Dune also. Uvi View says, will we be getting any more Dune audiobooks? Chuck says, is Children of Dune on the way? The answer to the first one, or the request about Dune Messiah, yes, Dune Messiah is airing soon. I want to say, is it next Thursday or the following Tuesday? It's currently available over on Patreon, but it should be coming up on the channel soon, and I believe it has a release date for you guys to check out if you want to check out the Dune, the playlist. It should tell you when that's coming out. Children of Dune is the 3rd book. It is in my to-read pile in front of me. I don't exactly know when I'm going to finish it. I've started with the first chapter. I have no idea when it's going to be released. I'm not planning on doing it as a daily chapter book, so it could take as long as several months to finish. But I do intend to do it because the Dune books are very popular on the channel, and it kind of all depends on whether or not they're planning on doing a Children of Dune movie, because that's the reason I wanted to do a Dune Messiah audiobook, is because they greenlit the movie Dune Messiah, which is supposed to come out next Christmas. So, yes, I will work on Children of Dune, but I have no idea when it's going to come out. Flick Street Productions says, I love the Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 mission called Violence and Timing. Do you like it? I don't know a ton of missions by their titles. So if you want to describe it to me, then I will probably be more familiar with it. I don't know it off the top by that title. The only Modern Warfare 2 one I know by name is No Russian. which will not be influencing one of the chapters in the radiation effect for obvious reasons, but or maybe it will. I don't know. We'll see. Probably not. Question from Colin Simonson, who says, can you please read the Hatchet series? Yeah, I mentioned kind of toward the beginning of this live stream, I would love to do a lot of the, just kind of like the summer reading books that people do between like 6th and 12th grade, or just stuff that you're reading in your English classes traditionally. I have some questions coming up about George Orwell, which we'll talk about, but I think that would do good things for the channel and bringing people to the channel, but I think it would be beneficial to people who maybe, like me when I was in high school, kind of struggled to sit down and read and focus without, someone helping you through it, if that makes any sense, whether it be through like a Spark Notes or reading the book along with another person, whether it be audiobook or that sort of thing. It's not always easy for people with very, very active thought processes to just sit down and read it chapter by chapter. That's, like I mentioned at the start of this live stream, that's why I read audiobooks, is because it is a lot easier for me to follow along if I'm reading it out loud than if I were to just read it straightforward. So, question from William M., who says, will you do the second book in the City of Ember? Good question. Yes, The People of Sparks. I have started recording it. I don't necessarily have a release date yet. Hopefully sooner than 6 months after The City of Ember, which puts us at about June. But I can't make any promises at the moment. My goal would be to have it out before June. But yes, I am hoping to do all 4 of the City of Ember books eventually. Same goes for the Giver series. The Giver is next on my book 2 of the Giver should be coming out sometime in the next couple months here. Lemon says, can you make a Spotify page? Then we could listen to you with our phones closed. No, and I mentioned this last live stream because Spotify's copyright restrictions are significantly different than YouTube's. The beneficial thing about YouTube or Vimeo or even Patreon is that what we do with these audiobooks qualifies as a fair use performance. So if an author were to take us to court over these, we could defend it on the use of fair use copyright law, because I am performing this. It's a recording of me doing it. With Spotify, when it comes to performances, because Spotify is in itself an audio performance-based system, you have to own the material that you are putting out there in terms of all of it. So if I were to record a Mozart song, Mozart's a bad example. Let's say I were to record a Queen song, right? I would have to have the legal rights to not only my performance of that, but the Queen song itself. I could put it on YouTube. I could put a video of myself covering Bohemian Rhapsody on YouTube, but I couldn't do it on Spotify because I would need the rights to Bohemian Rhapsody. It's kind of the same thing here. So I can't do that with Spotify, whereas we can do it with these performance-based videos on YouTube and Vimeo and Patreon and that sort of stuff. Flickstreet Productions says, Violence and Timing is a rescue mission where the team rescue their handler while fighting through a large highway convoy. It's a lot of fun. Yes, I'm familiar with it. I know which one you're talking about. My favorite mission from that game is the final one, where you get to throw the knife. In fact, that's probably where Emma's throwing knife thing came from. A little bit mixed with that and Hunger Games. Question from Luke Anderson, who says, so Selena Beauregard said that Luke lied to her about hurting her boyfriend, but continued to be his spy all the way up to the point where she died. It makes no sense. Also, Annabeth defending a murderer for 4 years while getting mad at Percy for having another friend who just happens to be a girl makes no sense. I understand the question and frustration, and I'll do my best to defend it in the way that I understand here. So, first part of the question was about Selena Beauregard saying Luke lied to her about hurting her boyfriend, but continued to be his spy all the way up to the point where she died. So, hopefully, you guys have never been in dangerous situations where you are, the easiest example I can give is connected to a gang or connected to a group of people where you do things to be beneficial for yourself or for them, whatever. You get involved with people that expect you to do things. And even when you don't want to do them anymore, you are in danger if you don't do what they say. So what I think this is for Selena is she's at the point where she recognizes that Luke is bad, evil, and has done things to hurt her and her family and the people that she loves, and Beckendorf, obviously. But the reason that she keeps acting as his spy isn't because she doesn't want to, or isn't because she wants to anymore. It's because she can't find a way to get out of it. And so her literal only out is her moment of death. She basically becomes a traitor against Luke, which then leads to her death. And so I think that would be my defense of that, if that is what Rick was thinking or not. I don't know. The second half about Annabeth defending a murderer for 4 years while getting mad at Percy for having another friend who just happens to be a girl makes no sense. I'm going to split that into two parts. So Annabeth defending a murderer for 4 years is a complicated one. So keep in mind that Annabeth idolizes Luke. Annabeth has been in love / obsessed with Luke from the time that she met him, and has looked up to him her entire life. He is her biggest role model. And this might be confused now if you've seen the TV show, because in the TV show, Annabeth sees Luke betray Percy, right? That doesn't happen in the books. In the books, Annabeth has to come to terms with Percy telling her that her idol is a bad person. And she doesn't believe him. And we go through 4 books where she continues to see him becoming more and more evil, but she is always hopeful that he can be redeemed. And finally, we get to the point in book 4 where she finally accepts the fact that Luke is evil. It's a big character arc, and it's fantastic. I think it's very well written, and hopefully that makes sense to you, given that her entire life she looked up to this person, and it's very difficult for her to acknowledge the things that she hasn't necessarily seen firsthand. She's just hearing from other people. Of course, then you know we see a little bit of it with the Sea of Monsters, and we specifically see it Titan's Curse and Battle of the Labyrinth. The part about Percy having a friend who just happens to be a girl, it's a little more complicated than that, because Percy doesn't handle his relationship with Annabeth well. In book 4, they're supposed to have a date, which he blows off, and Annabeth finds him with another girl, which causes tension in their relationship. And then, in addition to that, Percy goes on to essentially start dating Rachel Dare, or have a romantically inclined friendship with Rachel Dare, because Annabeth's jealousy of that initial situation clouds everything. So neither of them are perfect, and neither of them handle it very well, and it causes complications in that. With that, I think Annabeth can be defended for both those reasons. Not perfectly. Obviously, she's not perfect. She's making poor decisions, but Percy doesn't handle it very well either. And so it's very complicated. I think it's very well written. If you come at it from that knowledge and seeing the way things get complicated, and keep in mind these are 15-year-old, 16-year-old kids. That is where those backgrounds come from. Let's see here. Flick Street Productions says, plus the Call of Duty, Modern Warfare 2 mission alone, where Soap is injured and has to escape town while being hunted and having to create weapons. I imagine the IREA series, the Radiation Effect series, having something like that. We may see something soon with Johnny. I'm not going to spoil anything. Let's continue with a question from Mr. J-Rock, who says, I've been trying to get into the Greenbone saga. Would you read it? Your voice would be perfect for it. I don't know that I'm super familiar with the Greenbone saga. I will probably have to check that out and let you know if that's something I'm interested in adding to my list. Question from de Schmuck, who says, I never realized that Sadie was a foot person. Well, it's in the audiobook, so it's got to be real. It's right there in the audiobook. I don't know how to get around that. It says Sadie's a foot person, so you have to believe it. Alexis the Magical Girl says, could you read Avalon Web of Magic? I'll certainly add it to my list. I am not familiar with it. I would have to check it out. Yeah, I'm not super familiar with it. Maria says, what do you think about Carlos Ruiz Zafón and Emil Zola? Not super familiar. I know roughly who they are and what their works are, but I'm not familiar with any of their works. So I just kind of have a broad understanding. I have a very Americanized 21st century view of literature and art, I guess, which can be a good thing, can be a bad thing. And so I guess my knowledge of what I would see as more, non-American kind of earlier artists and playwrights and literature authors and that sort of thing is fairly limited. My I don't know how to describe this better. A lot of my intake of media is very, very much English world, for better or worse. I mean, when I think of, because Zola's French, right? When I think of French authors that I'm actually familiar with, I would say Jules Verne, and that's probably it, which is sad, but I would like to expand that, hopefully. Flick Street Production says, also about Rachel, she knows Annabeth loved Percy and was ready to step aside and let them be together. She all but implies before being the Oracle that they're destined to be together. She does, but so the interesting thing about Rachel is she doesn't understand her connection with Percy. And it's almost that she initiates a relationship with Percy, whether romantic or not, because she doesn't see the details of what her future involves and how he's in it. And so she kind of sees this need to be with him, whereas he almost takes that as a flirtatious, romantic way. So the scene that we see at the beginning of The Last Olympian, right, is essentially him cheating on Annabeth if they were to have a relationship, which at that point they don't. And so if anyone is complicating things and making Annabeth justified, it's Percy. It's very interesting. Books for Life says, new Percy Jackson / Riordan verse fan here. When does Percy come back? Good question. Percy does not appear in The Lost Hero. The Lost Hero is the first book in the Heroes of Olympus series. Percy is missing for it, and that is done on purpose so that we are introduced to a new set of characters while wanting Percy back, while not being overly distracted because it's the start of a new series and Percy is absent. Does that make any sense? So Percy shows up in Son of Neptune. He is the main character in Son of Neptune and is one of the main characters in the series going forward. And then he is obviously the main characters in the next 3 Percy Jackson books, and he is not one of the main characters in Trials of Apollo. But yes, he will appear in book 2. Question from Natty, who says, am I the only one who's crazy upset about the demigods not being in Trials of Apollo? I don't know what you mean by not being in Trials of Apollo, because they are. Every single member of the 7, in fact, if you expand that to the 9, with Nico and Reyna, every single one of them appears in the series, right? Percy appears in the first book, Nico appears in the first book, Annabeth, I take that back. Annabeth really doesn't, but that's because she shows up in Magnus Chase. Frank and Hazel show up in book 4. Jason and Piper show up in book 3. Leo shows up in book 2. Raina shows up in book 4. They're all there. If your question is, you're upset that they're not more involved in the series, I think that's the point. They had their own series, and so now this is a new character. This is a new narrative. Otherwise, we'd just be treading new territory and recycling material, which is kind of how the new Percy Jackson books feel. Question from Zine GKD, who says, what happened to Percy's poison bending? Good question. So poison bending is the term that has been given. Obviously, it's based on like blood bending from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Percy has the ability to use his water powers on liquid poisons. But he doesn't do it because of the fact that he tries it once, and Annabeth witnesses it happening, and she is so terrified by his power that he vows to himself never to see Annabeth look at him like that again. And so it's less a he can't do it, and it's a he won't do it because he knows how terrified it made his girlfriend the first time he did it. So that's kind of why it doesn't show up. Flick Street Productions says, also about Rachel, she does apologize to Percy after he believes she used him the whole time, especially after she realizes her destiny and feels bad over using Percy to get there. Yes, you're completely right. She outwardly outlines it toward the end of the 5th book. Like, this is why I did what I did. This is why I believed what I did. I didn't realize it meant this kind of thing. Question from Yoj Santos, who says, what did Apollo mean in Trials of Apollo when he said that Athena and he had a little tiff during the Trojan War? They kind of started the Trojan War. I mean, they picked their sides and they were responsible for it. So the little tiff he's referencing is the fact that they basically are responsible for the entirety of the Trojan War. Jenny Bagby says, what is Rick's obsession with Colorado? It's in most of his books. It's not in most of his books. There are 19 in the Greek series and 6 in the others, and Colorado only appears in 3 of Rick's books. So that is less than 10%. I'm not going to do the math. It appears in The Lightning Thief. They go to Denver, and that's when they get trapped in the water park. It appears in Colorado Springs, appears in Battle of the Labyrinth briefly, like very briefly, and then in The Lost Hero, they go to Pikes Peak. So those are the only 3 examples of when Colorado appears in the series. They actually go to Connecticut more than they do Colorado. So I'm not entirely sure what you mean by his obsession with it, because it's definitely not. It's only in 3 books. It's never in the Kane Chronicles. It's never in Magnus Chase. I Love Penguin says, what is your second channel? Depends where you're starting. So we have 2 channels. We have this channel that this is airing on called Echo Worm Audiobooks. This is where we do all of our daily chapters. And then we also have Echo Worm, which is where we do all of our full versions. So if you're familiar with one and not familiar with the other, we do have 2 separate channels. One does the daily chapters, one does the full versions. And then, of course, you can find all of the stuff that's not on either over on Vimeo or Patreon for free. Flick Street Productions says, what video game console do you play? Well, I play PlayStation when it works, but this weekend was not one of those times. Yeah, Friday I was very disappointed. G. Wolf says, I would love to hear you read Pegasus, The Flame of Olympus by Kate O'Hearn. I don't know that I'm familiar with that book. I will have to check it out and see if that's something worth reading on the channel, rather. Lily Pretty Lamb says, I find it so interesting how Rick writes about encounters with Hebe. If I ever met this goddess, I don't know if I'd appreciate being brought back to my childhood. Not everyone's youth is a fond memory. It's a very good point. I want to say, and I'd have to reread through the way Rick writes Hebe to see if my thoughts are kind of counterintuitive to this. But my understanding of what Hebe does in Chalice of the Gods is less about them reliving their childhoods and simply being transformed back into children and the headspaces that they had as children. And that has less to do with the experiences that we have as children, which I understand, like you said, it's not always a positive experience. A lot of people have really traumatic childhoods, especially nowadays, that they don't look back on fondly. And I think that's less what Rick's going for and more going for the fact that there was a time in our lives, some people more than others, where there was a lack of responsibility, an abundance of innocence, a time when things were significantly less stressful and a lot more hopeful than a lot of us have now, or a way to see the world that is more we look at more fondly than now, right? So, for example, like I I miss the days when I didn't have to pay taxes. I miss the days when I didn't have to do all of these adult things and have all of these responsibilities, and I could go to school and I could draw, and I like my responsibilities were significantly lower than they are now. And I look back at that and I think of that fondly. It's like, oh, if I could go back to this time, that would be awesome. I understand not everybody's like that, but I think that's what Rick's going for more than anything else. So I am sorry to hear about your experiences, and sorry to hear that you connect with this in a way that is not the way I think Rick intended, but that everyone has different experiences. Maria says, have you checked out The Great Storyteller? I have not had a chance to do that yet. I want to say you or someone else requested that last live stream or the one before, and I am in a very busy season at the moment with everything going on outside of the channel in addition to what I'm doing here, so I haven't had a chance yet. A couple questions or comments. David says, Echo Worm sings? And Ian Anderson says, bro, you're so good at singing. How? Well, thank you very much. I don't think you guys have seen very good performances of me on the channel. I would say the best singing that I ever do is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. If you guys haven't heard my rendition of that, that's the Hunger Games prequel, where I do all of the... I'm no Rachel Ziegler, but I certainly do my best. But yes, I am in fact a professional musician. So voice acting is not... I've mentioned this before. I don't make any money off the channel beyond what you guys give me on Patreon. It's never my intention to. But I do have a full-time job outside of this channel, and that is rooted in my background as a professional musician. So yes, I do in fact sing. You guys can find links to my music in the description below. Flickstreet Production says, was it hard for you to create an AI artwork for Jordan? I hope you can get one made. Yeah, it's basically impossible. Every time I put in a description of what Jordan looks like to an AI art generator, it faults on the scar. So I think what's going to happen is I'm going to have to make a generic character model and then physically do the artwork of the scar and the hair myself, which I may end up doing tonight if I remember it, because I would like to have just kind of a look for Jordan on there for people to look at, because he's the only main character that doesn't have artwork on the wiki. Flickstreet Production says, what is your band name again? My band is called Pando, P-A-N-D-O, if you guys want to check it out. This behind me is the cover of our last album. So if you search for it on Apple, if you search for Poseidon by Pando on Apple Music or Spotify, and you see something that looks like this, that is our last album, if you guys want to check that out. But feel free to do so in your free time. Nickerdoodle says, when are you doing George Orwell? That's a really good question. Originally, I had planned to do it over a year ago and have it out on the channel already. And then one of my favorite creators, and someone that I know very well, I shouldn't say know very well, someone that I am an acquaintance of through YouTube, as is the case for most creators. If you guys are familiar with In Deep Geek or IDG Live, Robert is a fantastic creator, has done a lot of Game of Thrones stuff over the years, but he has a second or even a third channel, if you can consider that, where he does fair use audiobooks. And right around the time when I was thinking about doing 1984, he himself did a version of 1984 that is fantastic. And in listening to him do it, I went, I'm never going to be able to do it as well as him. And I also don't want to, not that I would take away his audience, but I want to send you guys who are interested in listening to, more classical literature. If it's available on his channel, go check it out. It's called The Well-Told Tale. That is the name of Robert's third channel. He does a ton of audiobooks there. He's got 1984 done. I want to say he may even have Animal Farm. I know he's done Frankenstein. I think he may have done Dracula. Or maybe I have those reversed. He's done a whole bunch of Jules Verne. But he's got a fantastic voice. And if you guys want to go check that out, it's better than anything I could ever do for George Orwell. So that is The Well-Told Tale. Tell him that Ty from Echo Worm Audiobooks sent you. He'll probably know who you're talking about. Arts by Savannah says, have you watched the Percy Jackson show? It's on Disney Plus if you haven't. Yes, I have. I'm very familiar with the show. In fact, the show is what made my channel popular. I had the first 3 or 4 books available on the channel, and we had maybe 100 subscribers. And then the TV show came out, and we blew up to over 20,000 at the moment between our 2 channels. So, yeah, I have the TV show to thank for making my channel popular. It's one of those, it's like, oh, right place, right time. I have one more pre-prepared question, and then I'm thinking we'll probably wrap things up here unless there are more questions that you guys have or want to ask in the chat. Of course, especially radiation effect, I always love talking about during these live streams. But if there's anything else you guys are interested in asking, feel free to do so. Otherwise, we'll wrap things up toward the start of the hour here in about 5 minutes or so. Question from Hannah Sullivan, who says, have you or would you do any Shakespeare? Yes. My intention has always been to do Shakespeare eventually. Not even for the sake of I think I could do it well. I think I just have a lot of fun doing it. You know, I have read all of the classics that as an American we have to read in school. So you're talking Romeo, Juliet, Julius Caesar, Macbeth, Hamlet, that sort of thing. But there are the other ones that I'm not super familiar with, like Othello, The Tempest, a lot of the historical plays I'm not super familiar with. And I think I would have a blast not just reading them, but learning about them in a way that I've never seen performed before. So very, very excited to get to it eventually if I ever do. Problem is, the list keeps getting bigger as time goes on, and I keep having to push that back further. Let's see here. Flick Street Productions says, you should make a page for the radiation effect on TV tropes. I know how to do it and can help you. Lots of books have pages on there. It can be made after the first book's final chapter. I'd love to. Yeah, that would be fantastic. I think that would, anything to kind of call attention to the series, I think would be great. If you're willing to help, that'd be awesome. Meaningless Standard says, unfortunately got busy here and there and unable to think of enough questions. I'll be heading out. See you, Echo. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you joining us today, and thank you very much for your continued support of the channel. I do want to give a shout out to all of my patrons. These are my upper tier patrons, so of course, like I said, if you want to skip ahead of the channel, it's $5 a month or more. You are more than welcome to join. That gets you all the way through the 3rd book in the Trials of Apollo, gets you all the way through Dune Messiah. Currently, we're working on Aragon over there. But then these are the people that go above and beyond my $10 a month or more tier in Flick Street Productions says, plus with your permission, I plan to make an essay video about the book with an ending explanation video. I would absolutely adore that. Let me know, like, when the book is done and when you have that finish, I would love to promote that on the channel and share just my thoughts on it with you, of course, when it's done. Or if you guys are interested in making just kind of a, you know, if there's a video of getting into the series or getting into the book and knowing where we're at now in the series or theories that you guys have, I would love to hear them. Of course, the main place that we're talking about that sort of stuff is over on Discord. You guys can check it out with the link to Discord in the description below. Check that out. Let me know what you guys think of all of the new chapters. Chapter 25 should be available on the channel for free. If you want to check that out, I'll probably drop that, just kind of publicize it on Thursday if you guys are interested. It's already available over on Patreon as well. But yeah, with that, I think we'll wrap things up. Flick Street Productions is heading out. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll do this in about 2 weeks' time. 2 weeks from this Thursday is going to be February 27th. Let's plan on that, of course, 4 o'clock Eastern time. Let me know other questions you guys have by dropping them not in the chat, but in the comments section below. And hopefully, we will see you guys back on the channel very, very soon.